start out more like by the book, more legal, and then he sort of went off in this atheistic antinomian direction.
Yeah, yeah. He started
Yeah.
off. Yeah, that's true. That
Yeah,
is correct.
How about you give a little bit of an overview on that? It's like I can get into detail on more of his esoteric beliefs, but his early days and how it started is something that I think you'd be stronger on.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I meant to do the reading of my book again of the mixed multitude, but it started in the shtetls. It started in the lawlessness of the Pale of Settlement, where there were some people. I don't believe it started out as a messianic movement. I think it just kind of started out as, and I don't even know if I would consider Jacob Frank a messianic movement. I think it was more an anti-clerical movement that was designed to just kind of, secularize Jews and bring them into the fold of the Christian world, like the secular fold, so to speak, or what would be considered the mainstream fold.
You say the Christian world. It's like in a sense that's correct, but they were atheizing the Christian world at the same time. So it's like
Yeah.
What you see going on here. We're talking about the Jewish movement, in some ways mirrors what's going on in the Christian world. But I'd say there's other ways that it's not parallel, because what you have is you had Jews confined to ghettos, which goes back to Venice. And a lot of them were actually poor. So this is one of the reasons why I oppose the whole Jewish question thing. So you did have a lot of rich Jews who would end up like allying with and intermarrying with some of these like noble or royal figures. But by and large, a lot of times Jews would be, in Jewish communities, would be straight up oppressed. But in these communities, rabbis would have tons of power, because Judaism is a legal system. So that whole legal religious framework was pretty much the entire culture. So that ended up bringing quite a bit of power into the rabbis. So from a Jewish perspective, where you're looking at, hey, maybe there's dialectic warfare, maybe there's like, synthesis and antithesis, thesis, and synthesis. There might be some negation warfare going on. It's like, if I was a religious Jew and I was looking at the history, I'd argue that, maybe abuses on the part of the rabbis would be sort of like a mot, then destruction of entire culture and tradition, and fixing those conditions would be sort of the Bailey and the avenue for complete negation, to be able to turn all that into a completely different thing, and then end up obviously weaponizing it into Zionism.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that, because the Frankist movement, obviously, I think it was kind of an extension of the radical Kabbalist movement more than it was a messianic movement, and I think that's what Frank was a part of. And I think they were originally, the original intent, it seems, because that's why, like, the rabbinic, basically, this is actually going on still in the Chabad Judaism, where there are messianists who have very radical ideas of who Schneerson is. But what you get in this situation is the Pale of Settlement. It's these places where oh, hold on just a
Hey, what's up? Oh, are you good, Danny? Yeah, looks like he had something going on. So Danny can hop back in. But while he's coming back on, I want to bring attention back to the whole anti-clericalist trends going on at this time. So part of what was going on is you had a push to be able to integrate Jews into the larger European culture. So you had people like, I'm not sure how you pronounce this guy's name, like Maskim, but he argued that there was pretty much an over-reliance on Talmudic scholarship, and it was like stifling innovation. And they had this idea that, following these religious traditions by the books would keep you sort of stifled in this ghetto mentality. So while you had the printing press increase access to knowledge, access to these esoteric traditions, as Danny was saying earlier, it's like to be able to get into Kabbalah and these like occultic traditions, where I'm skeptical of all of it, to be honest, but I can play devil's advocate and say maybe it can work if you have all that training. What you end up having is a bunch of people that aren't prepared for this kind of esoteric mysticism, where you're going into vulnerable states of meditation, pretty much just losing their grip on reality, getting involved in these movements. So I'd say that was a pretty big part of it. The context. Sorry, back, Danny.
Yeah, sorry, I got a phone
Yeah.
call.
No,
Yeah,
you're good.
I was listening to what you said, and it's absolutely true. In fact, it's actually mentioned there's a specific ritual that's part of, I guess, I don't know. I mean, it'd be considered part of occultism, but it's a warning on it, and it tells you not to do this. I guess, and they give examples of people who have and why you shouldn't. But they say if you take the afterbirth of a black cat, you dry it up, you rub it in your eyes, you'll see demons around you, and they warn you not to do this. So if you following the Jewish law, you're going to say, okay, I'm not going to do this. But if you are completely untethered to any kind of Jewish law, then you'll do whatever you want. And there's probably people who have done this, and we don't know, they get Jewish and not. But what I was going to say was I consider the Frankist movement an extension, a radical extension of what Shabbatai Tzvi was doing, because Shabbatai Tzvi was basically creating an opposite world for Judaism. So on a day that you would fast, you would feast. On a day that you would mourn, you would celebrate. So funny enough, that also is kind of like proto what secular communism would look like. So
it's a mirror image. It's all Illuminism. It's literally Illuminism. Yeah.
Exactly. So in the Pale of Settlement, where Frank was living, and where where this was starting to take root, it started off with the famous, what was called the Lankarani affair, which was when when a group of these Frank followers took a topless woman, put the crown of the Torah on her head, and danced around her. So they made her the Torah, and this
the divine feminine. Yeah.
And this became a huge thing that broke, because the rabbis, in the Pale of Settlement, in the Council of the Four Lands, your religious community was controlled by your religious leaders. So if you needed outside assistance, then you would go to the church. So what ends up happening is the rabbis who basically is, and this happened, this, like I said, what I was saying before, is that this is going on even today in the Chabad movement, where it's well known that there are extremist factions with very wild perceptions of who Schneerson is and the Messianic age. And they don't nip it in the bud when it starts. They allow it to just they hope it's going to, just come and go. And it doesn't. It turns into the Frankist affair. So what ends up happening is, at some point, the rabbis are trying to shut him down, but the Frankists are like, well, we're not doing anything wrong, and they appeal to the church for assistance, and the church actually took the side of the Frankists. They actually had told them, first thing you got to do, and this is what we're getting to with breaking, is repudiate the Talmud. That's the very first thing that they asked them to do, is repudiate the Talmud. So once they agreed to do that, the movement is now antinomian, which means it's now free to do whatever it wants. And that is how it developed into what it did, which was basically a wild, Kabbalistic free-for-all.
Well, yeah, no, and what you're talking about, where like they make a woman the Torah, it actually overlaps in some ways with Ignatius Loyola's whole spiritual journey visiting the Black Madonna, because that's actually gets to what I was getting at earlier when I opened up, when I was talking about, like, hey, I'm against the Catholic Church, but to say, like, oh well, it's the Catholics running things, pushing a Catholic agenda, it's like, in a lot of ways it actually isn't true, because it's like the Jesuits have this reputation of being, pro Thomas Aquinas, pro Aristotle, but the way I see it is since it's Counter-Reformation, the strategy there is, hey, we're the rigorous traditionalists. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, they're pushing atheism and they're pushing anti-clericalism, right? And also, part of that is also like they had other religious orders they were competing with, like quite a bit. Obviously now I say the Jesuits control the Franciscans and Dominicans now, but I don't think that was always the case. I think they actually had a good bit of competition. I mean, if you look, those Catholic orders actually were getting the Jesuits, kicked out of other countries. But you look at Frank though. You can jump in with this. Let me just finish this. Frank had a very similar kind of journey. He ended up, I forgot how you pronounce the name, but the Black Madonna figure I'm talking about, where on
Seshtova. Yes.
Yeah. So it's
like a Seshtova. I think it was pronounced something like that. Sejestova, the Black Madonna. Yeah. He spends time at the monastery there doing kind of an Ignatian sort of spiritual exercise.
So many parallels. And yeah, also it's like she's kind of like a synthesis of Mary, the Madonna, the Virgin, but also Mother Earth. So you've got this inversion of the role that femininity and purity is supposed to play in, but I'd say both Christianity and Judaism, because they have a pretty similar metaphysic at that point, because that's if how you interpret marriage is how you interpret the metaphysic of where divine feminine might come in, rather, so I'd say Christian.
No, that's absolutely right. That's true, because that's the thing, because what a lot of, especially when you speak to the Hasids, when you speak to the people who are against Frank, the first thing they bring up is the sexual immorality connected to the movement. And that was one of the biggest things, contrary to the Groyper claim that Jews have a free-for-all sex with everybody. Judaism is a very prude religion, and the divine masculine and the divine feminine appear in the marriage. So when a husband and wife get together, that's the the creation of the divine feminine and the divine masculine. Whereas what they did is they turned it into sexual immorality. They turned it into a full-on there's references in that symposium I sent you. They mention how even in pre-Lauria Kabbalah, there's the song Lecha Dodi, Leklat Kala, it's like, to you I turn, to the bride of the Sabbath. So even Sabbath is referred to kind of as a feminine. The Shekinah is referred to as a feminine, but it's not reconciled through like a Mary or something like that. It's reconciled through the man and the woman who get together and have kids, and it's like through the marriage. And that's where it comes out, is where not in free-for-all orgies and things like that, which is
they also made sex. It's like, okay, well, in a way, the physical mirrors the spiritual, but these two things are alienated. We're in like a fake state of affairs. So they had this idea that like through these like ritual orgies, you could tap into your spiritual self, and you could tap into the dot. I'm talking about the dot with Jacob Frank, his idea of gnosis through enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually gets into there. So in a way, like if you're looking at messianism, or you're looking at the whole Sabbatean movement, in a lot of ways, like Jacob Frank, what they had in common was they did have orgy rituals. They did have an inversion of the law, but Frank takes the esotericism and anti-clericalism to a whole new level. So when people talk about Lilith and demonology, where you have Eve is the Adam's wife, obviously have that in Genesis, but Jewish folklore that ends up going into Kabbalah, they have another character named Lilith, who she's actually Adam's first wife, but she's like a sinner, and in some cases she became a demon. And Eve is like the backup plan. So she's like this scorned demon, and she represents like an unrestrained kind of sex drive. If you want to think of the whole succubus archetype, where you have, you know, female evil, she feeds off attention, she drains everything, you know, she drains your life force, and later on you have the demonic lore of a succubus, where you have this female demon that shows up in people's dreams, and they drain both guys like life force and their semen. You know, honestly, I think that's a good analogy for porn addiction. But yeah,
and also she's also for antinomianism. She's a metaphor for like, you know, knowledge, because, you know, in Solomonic work, he refers to women, he refers to wisdom and the feminine, and even in Eastern Orthodox Christianity, they refer to the wisdom as Sophia, as a feminine, because I've wondered why, and it makes sense, because you kind of have the same drive to wisdom as the same drive that you have towards women, towards sex, towards love. You can become addicted to it for the wrong reasons. You can have many different types of relationships with wisdom.
And the people who oh, sorry.
Oh, no, let's go on.
No, I was just saying the people will point that out and be like, well, look, Proverbs, Solomon compares, you know, wisdom to a female, and they'll try and say that as examples of, look, you know, that's these people appropriating Semiramis and Mystery Babylon religion. Like, I completely disagree with that. It's like, there's a sense in which you can have those symbols be completely applicable. And, like, you know, I think people are sort of mixing up context and completely missing the point of how those analogies actually work. But just one thing I wanted to get to, and you can go, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were done, but it sounded like you had to pause. But so Frank actually inverted Eve in Lilith. So he actually made, like, Lilith, that whole archetype of unrestrained sexuality. That's the path to redemption, and that becomes the sort of female messiah figure. And then Eve, she actually represents evil, because he represented evil as, like, repression, and, you know, and that's obviously associated with legalism, in the old way.
Nomianism, not like, that's part of the antinomianism. No, that's true. I wanted to see, but go on. I wanted to check one thing
while you're going. So it's pretty interesting. So back to what I was getting about this being female messianism. It's almost like let's take the whole Jewish Torah metaphysic and completely invert it. So that's part of why you have this female messiah, but it's fundamentally atheistic. It's not like you have this, like, male savior figure coming in to conquer, to liberate people. But what it does sort of tie into that, because on one hand, since it's an inversion, it's a little bit of a paradox, actually, because there is a political redemptive kind of movement, but it's not like salvation by either following God's law, or for a Christian, like, Christ fulfills the law and you have faith in him, and then you have a renewed spirit to follow it, you know, much better. You know, there's you don't have anything like that. It's more of, like, political. We have to take it in our own hands. So it actually ends up being like, since they obliterate the metaphysics, it ends up being, let's take this in our own hands. Let's make heaven on earth. And actually, even though it, like, positions female sexuality as, like, the symbol to emulate, it actually becomes pretty repressive against women too. So it's like, on a metaphysical level, you could say it kind of is like female worship and divine feminine, but in practice, it actually is pretty repressive and brutal to women also.
Right.
Which is,
and I was gonna, I remember what I was gonna say also is, the reason like they consider it kind of a messianic movement, the Frankist movement, though I won't necessarily, because I don't know if he was necessarily a messianic figure, but what they believed in, and this I think actually goes back to Sabbateanism originally, is the idea that that the best way to bring the Messiah is through sin, instead of bringing, because there is always the Jewish idea that through following the law, through redemption, through repentance, national redemption, national repentance, the Messiah can come. But if we make the world so horrible, which kind of relates to Zionism, which is playing out Ezekiel, which is not supposed to, and certain and Zechariah, where, you know, there's this rebuilt state of Israel. It basically goes back to the concept of we don't need God to bring the Messiah. We can force his hand to bring it. We can force the Messianic age on our own. And part of the way we do that is through the worst kind of sin imaginable, you know, completely dissolving the law, completely rebelling against it. And that's I think what makes the Frankist movement itself considered to be a messianic movement, because they were trying to bring the Messiah through every wrong way possible.
Well, they have a completely twisted metaphysic to justify it, though. That's what I'm getting at, because it's like, if you look what the metaphysic offers, though, it's like, hey, we're really spiritual, we're focused on the spiritual, and hey, we can put the material in its context, like we can see the heavenly pattern, so that's why we know that we can do this sexual sin, but it's for the greater good, because we're going to be bringing this thing about. But to them, it's like, so this is where it starts departing from typical messianism, where like you expect, you know, it's like the Jews in the Old Testament, they were kind of expecting Jesus to overthrow the Roman Empire. Then later on, you had the Sabbatean movement. It's like, hey, this Sabbatean, I keep forgetting how to pronounce that guy's name, but like, you know, he was like claiming to be a physical Messiah and provide like, you know, physical political liberation. But for Frank, he had this sort of big brother figure. It's like you have this other world where there's this messianic figure that's interpreted as a divine entity residing in a higher world. He describes him as like being powerful and having this sort of guiding providential presence as this perfected masculine counterpart through the feminine Shekinah. Is that how you say it?
Shekinah,
Like,
yeah. Shekinah.
Shekinah. So, and then like they even had this idea where it's sort of a projection of Sabbatite Z. It's a whole messianic role. So it's almost like let's take what he did, but what he failed to fulfill, and let's sort of put this in Plato's world of ideas and forms. Mm-hmm. So then like, yes, the big brother force is out there representing the masculine role in, you know, his whole metaphysic, and you can access this messianic power through esoteric acts. So it's kind of tied to gnosis. It's actually pretty similar to Christ consciousness. So if you guys look up consciousness on my wall, you can end up finding this stuff. But there's this idea where there's no Messiah that comes down and saves you. You do it through your consciousness, where you have like this awareness of the presence of God at all times. But it's pretty much offering the whole demiurgic power, where I can sort of see the whole heavenly realm, and it ends up, I'd argue that what it actually is it's eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which we're commanded not to eat. But it's pretty much this idea that if enough of us reach this consciousness, we can transform the world by our own power. But they have steps to get you there, where it's like, okay, I'm looking for the spiritual guidance. Okay, I'm looking outside of myself. But really what it is it's like a step-by-step process to induce a psychotic messiah complex in people.
Yeah. And I think, and that's what they're preparing for today. That's what I think. That's what Zionism is. That's basically what Zionism is. Zionism, for all the rabbis who will think whatever they believe, whatever the Zionist rabbis will say, it is basically taking upon themselves to violate the law, to create the Messiah, to bring the redemption through, through it says it in Ezekiel, like this is supposed to happen anyway according to Ezekiel, but it doesn't, because that's I think one of the things about Jewish law, about how prophecies work, that isn't really understood and by Gentiles, and that rabbis who are Zionists know this, that the prophecies of Gog and Magog, the prophecies of a Messiah coming through this war, while they are not good prophecies, that's why you have the anti-Zionist Jews who refuse to, to associate with this, because they know it's not, it's completely antithetical. And Zionism does stem from that whether they want to believe it or not, it does stem from Frankism. It does stem from the idea that we can bring the Messiah on our own, even if it's going to be through war and bloodshed. But it's predicted, so why can't we do it? So why is it, so it's the right thing to do. We're
Yeah,
already in the midst.
we know better than God. We know better than God, essentially, is what
Yeah,
it's, yeah, we
yeah.
know. Well, yeah, this actually gets what you were saying about, like, what, how they had a tighter lid on when you can study Kabbalah, but how studying this stuff when you're not prepared can be dangerous. So, like, I've already said this multiple times. I'm skeptical of pretty much like any kind of mystic tradition where if you have a system where you come to knowledge, but you can't explain step by step like how that knowledge comes to be, like what causes it. I'm skeptical of it. That's a big problem I have with mysticism. So it's like, if you're a Christian, or Jews believe in the Holy Spirit too. It's like, if, hey, like, you could, like, let's say, like, you read something in scripture, you believe it, but science can't prove it. It's like, if you have the understanding of the Spirit of God and how inspiration works, you can still metaphysically justify that. But when it comes to the kind of knowledge that can come to you in these like mystic trances, that's where, yeah, that, see where I'm getting at, where I'd get a little bit skeptical with that. But yeah, like Frank referencing this sort of big brother figure, and to bring about like your Messiah consciousness, it needs to merge with the divine feminine. You can do this through like occultic acts and ritual orgies.
Yeah.
He's referencing other worlds from like Kabbalistic ideas, realms. I think you say it like Alamot, Aolamot. Am I pronouncing it? Like,
Olamot.
how do you?
Yeah.
Olamot. Yeah. So it's like
Worlds.
you have like four worlds: emanation, creation, formation, and action in the whole Lunaric Kabbalah, which is where the whole Sabbatean movement came from. But he actually like inverts this and reinterprets it as like accessible through those whole antinomical practices like orgies. So it ends up being as transgressive as possible. So if you look at Simon Hammerstein's The Box, Simon Hammerstein, he's this Jewish supremacist guy that, those shows they put on, they are extremely transgressive and in your face, like, and they end up disguising like satanic weddings as Jewish weddings also. It's about like pretty much inverting everything.
Yeah.
And that's where the whole female Messiah comes in, like the whole like merging of these categories through transgressive sex acts. So like inappropriate lewd sex comes in this, often involving like blood and feces. I'm not making this up. I don't want to get into details because it actually gets disgusting.
Yeah, it's true.
So this listen to how much nonsense this is. So yeah, having ritual sex lets you access this big brother residing in a higher world as like this cosmic ally, which corresponds with Frank's mission. So in his word, and it, like, so this is from in his words of the Lord, he ended up talking about receiving revelations from this figure where, he ends up accessing this knowledge through straight up like ritual sex. It's it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Well, that's what it was. It was about the complete transgression of the law, and that's and debaucherous sex and taboo sex, whatever the word you'd want to use, is one of the cardinal sins of Judaism. So the idea that if we do these kind of things, if we are as disgusting as possible, we are going to bring about the Messianic age, becomes righteousness. It's a complete inversion. It's very fascinating how he did it. But and that goes back actually to Sabbateanism, where he changed, because he did a lot of opposites too. And one of the things he famously did, well, infamously did, was he changed the Jewish prayer, saying, God moter matir asurim. He frees the prisoners. The blessed art thou, Lord, King of the universe, who frees prisoners. And he changes it to who moter asurim. He who permits that is what that is forbidden. So.
Well, and then, it's so, and notice how like he's saying like, oh, this is all spiritual. We're doing this like nasty physical stuff because we're focused on the spiritual. Like, you know, we have this gnosis, we can see the heavenly pattern, so we can see that it's actually good.
Mhm.
Idolatry always uses excuses like that. So it ends up promising you something spiritual, but it ends up being tied to the physical. So that's where idols come in. Like, hey, we want to show our allegiance to this concept, rather it be God or something, or rather it be virtues. So, you know, corresponding with virtues, you'd have certain statues and things like that. But when it came to this, with this whole like female messiah, you know who the messiah figure that he gave was actually his daughter, Eve Frank, who he named Eve.
Yeah. But she was never. But the movement basically died out under her because she wasn't nowhere near the leader. He was. The movement also broke up, and then it became it. I would say it kind of it became Reformed Judaism, which is what became like one of the Jewish outcomes of besides the Hasidic movement, was the Reformed movement, which was basically secularized, diluted Judaism. That was because part of the, if you think about it, part of what the outcome of the Frankist movement was actually the liberation of Jews when they converted to Catholicism, and they were baptized and became part of nobility. A lot of them were sponsored by noble families. They were freed. They were given, they were allowed to, they were, basically completely disconnected from both the rabbis and the ghetto and the law altogether. And they were liberated from their perspective into the secular world. And
well, it's oh, sorry.
No, that's go on.
Well, it's like so when it comes to Eve, it's like I know that it broke apart. It broke apart after Jacob Frank died because he was the charismatic leader holding together, but he was using his daughter. He was using her daughter as a symbol to try and enforce the metaphysics of this. So that's where it comes in with her. So she becomes sort of this physical anchor because, you know, they're talking about fake bullshit concepts, but having a physical representation, you know, that ends up enforcing this. So through her, like literally through her, this just normal human being presented as, you know, the Eve Messiah, you can access the concealed knowledge, the the gnosis in their system, which gives you access to power of these realms. And actually, like, they straight up promise, like, obviously Jacob Frank dies, all these people that claim to be messiahs end up dying, but yeah, they claim that they'd be able to access the secrets to eternal life. It's like, what kind of narcissism is this? So, why did the patriarchs of Judaism fail? And these would be the Abrahamic patriarchs that, you know, Christians would claim also. And also I think Muslims claim them as well. But they failed to achieve it because they couldn't access this inversion of categories. They couldn't tap into their feminine. So this whole big brother figure represents the cosmic order that the female messiah would end up joining with, and that creates a whole unified divine force to usher in redemption. So another component to these movements that shows Hermetic is you have an idea of merging categories of sex or later on gender. That's like 100% Hermetic. This is all repackaged Hermeticism being put through a Jewish feedback system, then exported into other traditions.